All right. Thanks everybody for joining on May 2nd. Um, we already went around and said hello to everybody and got a good idea of what the weather was like around the world. Um, we were supposed to have an AMA with Pedro today, but unfortunately, Pedro is not going to be able to make it. So, if anybody wants to spam the heck out of him on Discord and give him a hard time about not making it, I would be in favor of that. So go nuts. Um,
Could that have been too much partying for May 1st?
I, I think that's a definite possibility. Okay, so as far as recapping from last week, one of the main things that we were talking about was the proposal for like adding a metadata structure in order to have consolidated documentation. Um, I took on the evaluation of that to see if there was like a good way to sort of move forward and play around with it a little bit. But the past 2 weeks have been kind of crazy for me, so that didn't happen. Um, so if anybody has any additional thoughts on that or did some poking around that I didn't do, we could discuss that briefly, but otherwise we'll keep moving on.
I made very little progress, also been busy, unfortunately. And as it turned out, the PyPy metadata is complete mess. It's all over the place. And
Yeah,
fields are like, sometimes it's one field, sometimes it's another field. So more time is required.
yeah, absolutely. So I think we'll have to put a pin in that one, and maybe revisit it in the next go around. Um, when is that, Alyssa? Is the 16th?
That's a good question. I believe it is the 16th, like you said.
All right.
So yeah. All
So
right.
we will we'll check back in on that one on the 16th. Hopefully I'll have a chance to take a look at it. Um, and maybe have a little bit more to share and some additional thoughts. So what we can talk about before we sort of throw it on the floor and see who else has any new topics is Alyssa's module documentation quality project. She'd like to share some stuff with us, so I'll hand it over to her.
Yeah. So I'm pinch hitting for Pedro today. I know I'm a poor substitute for Pedro. Hopefully he'll be able to make it next time. Just something came up last minute, he said. So but I'm gonna share, let me share my screen, and then I'm also gonna put this in the chat what I'm sharing on the screen. This is in the Docs Hub repo. This is kind of basically where I keep documentation. I kind of think of it as it's a public repo that's kind of about internal SALT documentation stuff. If you ever want to see my world, I guess, a little bit, like this is where we have the personas, and it's also where I kind of talk and document for my own benefit, like the SALT docs tech stack and things like that, and what extensions we're using or things related to that. So that's kind of what this repo is, in case you're wondering about that. So I also, okay, sorry, this is also a minor tangent, but I have like I don't know if any of you have seen, but I have a roadmap. In fact, let me grab that public roadmap too. Give me 1 second. So I have a roadmap that I haven't tended to for a little while, but this is basically when people make big, giant requests for the SALT docs sometimes. And I want to honor those requests. And so a lot of times, like if it's a really good idea, but it's a big project or something like that, I'll add it to my my roadmap and then kind of indicate that people voted for it so that I know which ones are the most interesting to people. And there's a number of ones about module documentation. And what I do with this roadmap is sometimes when I have bandwidth, I'll talk to the community or to people internally at Broadcom and talk about which of these initiatives would you like me to pick up and start working on. And one of the times when I did that was we wanted to improve the quality standards for the module documentation, because we just figured that would make life better for everybody, including customers and things like that. And so for a while I was working on this project to improve the quality standards for the module documentation. I got preempted away from that project, as is typical. I get pulled off to work on other big initiatives sometimes. And for a while I had deferred this to a member of the SALT docs working group. And he took it as far as he could go, but back when I was working on the project, I kind of did this big sort of in-depth interview with a lot of core members of the team, as well as people who work with customers and who are experts in SALT, and kind of talked about what if we were to create kind of a standard template and try to enforce, try to get all of the modules to follow this template, what should go on to that template. And this is kind of what they came up with. So I'll hit the highlights really fast, which is they were saying it might be nice to have a table of contents at the top, of the module, so that you could skip to the relevant what are they called, commands? What's the one for you've got the module, and then I am blanking.
Function.
Thank you. I don't know why I couldn't think. It's too early. And so you could jump to the relevant function or something like that, from within the page, possibly with a table of contents, and auto generate that. This is kind of going along with sometimes it's not always clear when you're looking at the module documentation where the source file for that lives. So this kind of goes along with what Max was proposing about listing the source and where it came from a little bit. It's slightly different than what you were saying, Max, last week, but and then it should include a summary, which includes a description of what it does, and there should be ideally more than one, but at least one practical typical use cases and examples, maybe a high level overview of the typical user stories for that module, just to help people understand what the application is for that module and how it could solve their problems. And then we had a long debate over whether the example should go in the summary or in the actual functions. And we decided that for state modules, the summary should be a little bit meatier at the top of the module. And then for execution modules, the functions needed to be meatier, and that's where the example should go. And maybe kind of a brief description of classes and functions. One big one that kind of came up is putting the virtual name of the module there, because sometimes it's not always easy to know what the virtual name is for the module, so that you can call it and things like that. I don't know if that's possible to pull out programmatically, but and then so another piece is organization. Have a way to link to similar or related state or virtual modules or things like that. And a big part of a separate kind of initiative that I think is a big deal, and as you can see, I have another kind of initial piece for that, is to improve the search navigation by adding metadata, which is why last week's conversation was very interesting to me. Dependencies is a big one. What do you need in order to be able to run this module? Stuff like that. configuration. What do you need to do in order to configure the module and get it up and running? Any notes or warnings like don't do this, you know, or version stuff. We should probably need to, version stuff wasn't included in this original proposal, but with the fact that we're kind of decentralizing those modules, versions I think will become a little bit more important, and version compatibility. Then of course there's the functions, and this one probably needs to be broken down and thought about a little bit more. Like Patrick, one of our internal people, said that for every 5 quargs that maybe you would see at least one use case. Like he was trying to suggest how do you know when a quarg or when a function needs an additional use case or something like that. The parameters and also what data type it is, whether it's a string, a dict, or something like that. And also I was told that the return should be part of those patterns. Return data and example output. Effective code comments would be really nice. And then the metadata related to what we were talking about last time, some way to indicate maturity or support or something like that. Like maybe it could fetch the most recent commit date to just show the activity or something like this. But I did mention that that could be out of scope. All right. So that was my that was my project, and that was as far as I got with, like, I was able to create this sort of ideal outline. We were in the middle of trying to apply it to, say, the file module. We figured that would be a good one. The file execution module, I should say. We were going to try making that one sort of the golden module where we implement all of these things and make it really, really good, because that's a module that nearly everybody has to use at some point, and then test this out and see, do we like it? Is this organization good? But so that was kind of what the project was, and I put it on the back burner. But this is because I kept getting preempted away to do things like work on the salt install guide, worked on that instead of this. And so I figured this would be a good group to talk about this with, you know, and also to talk about how our vision for this changes in the realm of extensions, especially with decentralized extensions, and how we can maybe, in the copier template that Megan's been working on or something like that, how we can maybe implement some of these good best practices. I know we can't force people to use them, but maybe lead them to use them, like, and encourage them to use them. I don't know. What are some thoughts on that?
I think that everything that's on there is awesome. As far as, I guess, the internal process by which you're adopting that, you know, if the goal is to switch or, you know, clean up the file module first, and say like, hey, this is how things should be. Is there going to be any initiative to go back and change the existing module documentation en masse, or is it something that is only going to apply to new modules or functions going forward?
Good question. The way I had originally conceived of it at the time was, okay, create the standards, get one module that meets the standards that we're like, yeah, this is one that is good. And then require it for net new modules going forward, but then also probably organize, at the time I had grand visions of organizing another Salt Docs community event, because our last one, which has been a while for now, but our last one was wildly successful. And I could see this could easily be a community event, kind of like how we did the Salt Docs working, the Salt user guide event, if any of you participated in that and remember it, where we could chunk the work out, and depending on how many people come, they could work on just kind of like, we could have like a community hackathon day where people work on improving the documentation here and there and stuff like that. And we just get as far as we get based on the amount of participation that we get. That was my original plan for that. I don't know if that's a pipe dream or things like that, but our last Salt Docs working community event, which was in remind me, Derek, was it in 2021, I believe. And it was a huge success. We had like 50 participants or something like that. It was really, and we accomplished all of the work that we had set out to do. So it's not within the realm of like it's within the realm of possibility is what I should say, with enough advanced planning and things like that. I'm not saying this group has to organize that event. It was just my original idea for it. So. Did that answer your question? Were you like,
yeah, I was just reading Max's comment in the chat. Salt version compatibility. So that is, it's a really good point, especially when it comes to extensions. But I feel like it's difficult to say. So ideally with plugins, right, they have a pretty wide install base, I guess, where it can swing from maybe something that's even currently unsupported by Salt proper, like Salt 3001 is out of support, but this plugin, if somebody's running this old version, will still work. I think there's value in that, but I think that also what I've been doing personally as I'm rolling out extensions is basically like the things that I'm implementing are geared towards the supported versions of Salt currently, and I'm not trying to restrict people into only using those. But if they come at me and say like, hey, it's not working on this, then like, all right, well, it's not my problem, right? Use a supported version of Salt, sorry. Or you can fork and figure it out.
So that's about the first point, the Salt version compatibility one.
Yeah. The version added change tag for new module functions. I think that's another good one. I'm not sure if I saw that in your list.
I don't think I did that, and that is a good addition. Yeah. I used to be like, one time I remember when I was young and dumb, young and Salt, I should say, like inexperienced with it. I was like, why do we even need, like, why do they put this version? This was added in this version on these features. I was like, this is just meaningless data. Let's get rid of it because it's not typical for a lot of documentation. And everybody was like, no, that's the most helpful information for me because it helps me to know which version I need to upgrade to or when things are deprecated. So I agree that it's a useful thing. And I was educated about how valuable that is to people as soon as I suggested not including it at one point. So it's a good suggestion.
But like the main thing that my head goes to, right, is like how do we enforce these things, right? Like how do we take the existing stuff and transition it over, certainly, so that the documentation becomes more useful, better structured, however you'd like to put it. But also as we're creating new things, how do we enforce that? And I think a lot of what is listed on that page is hard to enforce technically. Putting pre-commit checks or some test or whatever together. I think that in some cases you could probably do that. But I think some of the things are going to be kind of, it's going to be on the folks who are maintainers and, doing the reviews for incoming things, to be aware of those things. So I think it's going to be a big socialization campaign. If we can put like a link to those standards on the salt extension community sort of front page thing and like make a big deal out of it, that might be helpful. But I think that it's definitely going to be a lot on people catching things, knowing what the standards are, and then forcing them on PRs coming in.
Yeah, I agree. So I think that kind of like what you're saying is, do we use a carrot or do we use a stick? Like enforcing it programmatically or technically is using the stick, because it's kind of saying like, if you don't meet these standards, you don't get merged in, or you don't do this or something like that. It's like forcing you and checking you to make sure that you are meeting the standards. And what here he's saying, and sounds good, is that there's not a lot of options for that. So using the stick to motivate people to do it is probably out of the realm of possibility. And so what we need to do is use the carrot, which is like encourage people to, speak to their better angels and get them to get the documentation into a good place, and see if we can find incentives to increase the adoption of these standards in the documentation. And one thought I have on the carrot methods or things like that related to a little bit of the discussion we were having last week about having metadata. So if I recall, one of the things, when I say last week, I mean last time. That's what it wasn't last week. Anyway, the last time we met, if I recall, one of the ideas that we had floated was some way of kind of indicating in the metadata whether the module is validated or not, like whether we're like, yeah, like it could be on a scale of like, use at your own risk because we haven't checked it and we don't know if it will work. You can try it, but it's not validated by us, versus this is a trusted one. This is validated. We know we can vouch for this particular extension because they've met our requirements. In that same vein, there could be something for the documentation, like there could be a badge or something like that is like, this meets our standards for quality when it comes to documentation. Or this one, I don't know if it would be a binary or a scale or something like that, but that could be a possibility to just indicate like they've got their documentation in a good place. It checks these boxes, that kind of a thing. I don't know.
I don't know if that's going to be sustainable though, right? Because like, who's going to be the documentation police, and who's going to constantly check that, right? Like if you can't programmatically validate that the documentation is in the structure that you want all the way, then essentially somebody has to continue to validate that that badge is still valid and like revoke it when it's not up to snuff. So it's probably not something that we could pursue.
Yeah, Max, you came off mute. What's your thoughts on it?
I think the discussion was more about the official versus community status, not about some gatekeeper who can validate things.
I didn't catch that last little bit. So you were saying about the community status, but I didn't catch the last part.
Yeah, it was more about the flag of whether the extension is official one that is maintained by the core team, or it's a community one, or it's someone else.
Yeah.
And that was all about the status, not about validation or like gatekeeping or.
Yeah, and I like the idea of like going further if possible, but I agree, difficult who's going to enforce or if there was a crowdsourcing option, like a way to get, people to upvote an extension or something like that, that'd be nice, but I don't know if that's feasible either. So yeah.
I think the best thing we can have is some badge that indicates whether the extension uses the up-to-date template, upstream template.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it.
Yep, it's fair. What about the copier template, at least, like including guidelines in the copier template so that it at least like encourages them or nudges them to put in the sections of the documentation that they need, and guides them or helps them along that way?
I think we could do that for some things,
Yeah.
right? The problem is that like most of the extensions aren't net new, right? Like it's old code being moved into extensions. So that'll help with like, hey, I have this thing that doesn't exist whatsoever anymore. The copier template will have a framework, and we can ensure that that framework has some of like the, hey, make sure that there's parameters listed, and that there's in the a top section that has use cases or something like that, right? Like whatever we wanted to put in there, we absolutely can. But we have at least 130, potentially more module groupings coming out as potential extensions. Hi Melissa, we'll miss you. So in those cases, right, like that's not going to be necessarily like a gate that I'm going to put up on extensions being ported over, because we got to try and get these things done before the 3008 release.
Yeah, that all makes sense.
But and that's kind of why I was asking, like, okay, like how do we attack this going forward?
Yeah.
For the existing things, because I definitely agree that like there is no standard currently. Some of the modules have one format while others have another. Just as far as like the RST like indents, and like who uses param and who doesn't, and
Yeah.
and it's all over the place. And generally when I have contributions, I just follow whatever standard is closest to wherever I am at the time.
Mhm.
Right? Like if I'm adding a parameter to an existing function, I just like say, okay, well, this is how this function currently is. But I don't know if there's like a way that we can encourage people to take on some of the documentation changes in the existing code as they're working close to it, without being the jerk that says, I'm not going to merge your stuff until you do something that's unrelated to your change, right? Like I never like that.
Yeah, no, I get that. Like where that's the fun of like, so Derek and Derek and I talk about implementing a broken link checker into like to programmatically check whether the links in the SALT documentation are good. The problem is that whoever opens the next PR would get the hammer. You got to fix all the broken links, or we don't merge in. And so we figured we wouldn't hurt somebody's break somebody's brain by, guess what, you got the hot potato and you get to fix all the broken links. Yeah, anyway, but sort of like that, like you're saying, maybe not quite as heavy as that, but yeah.
There is a broken link checker in the copier template for
Yay,
the extensions.
good principles going forward. That's wonderful.
I found that out because I'm kind of like the owner of the Azure extension, and darned if Microsoft doesn't change their link structure every 3 months. It's insane. It's like things are always moving around.
Yeah, it's frustrating. So get it. Well, yeah, that was my, oh, I've got 5 minutes. I gotta fill the SALT extensions agenda. What can I possibly talk about? That was my substitute for that. So I guess if any of you, I would love, I really appreciate your feedback, Max, on what should go into this template, because this is my first time even sharing this with the community. So it's really good to, well, I mean, I've shared it a little bit with other people, but only lightly. So it's really good to get that initial feedback. If anybody, I know this is slightly tangential to our project, but if anybody has any feedback on that template, that would be great, because it's a project I've been really seriously considering picking back up again. It seems very timely with now that we're moving all these things into extensions. So if any of you have any additional feedback on that template, I'm going to be experimenting with ways to possibly scale improving the documentation. May or may not involve AI, maybe. I'm going to maybe experiment with it just to see if it's helpful. So yeah, if any of you have any other thoughts on that, that's great. That's it for me on this topic, unless anybody else has more to say on that topic.
Looks like no takers. Do we have any other new items whatsoever? Anything that anyone like to talk about? All right. Well, I think we'll cut out a little bit early today.
Does that mean you got your wish, Nick? Like you get 20 minutes back so that you can go back to your busy life, I guess. That's good.
I'd much rather be hanging out with you folks.
Yeah. And I will make sure that Pedro comes next time. Hopefully we'll get him to pin him down and get him to get some give us an AMA on testing. It was so hopefully that'll work out for next time, if that sounds good for the next agenda. Is that cool with you, Nick?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to get him over here and talk to us about that.
Okay. Sounds
So,
good.
yeah, like I said, if anybody wants to give him a hard time, I think he's sound tech on most platforms. So definitely, I don't know if you can find some way to like bot spam his Discord, go for it.
Yeah, actually, I did have one thing I wanted to ask people on the call. Is that in the Discord, I've been talking to Lisa and Chunga about this, is that Discord has an option to have a forums channel instead of just a text channel. And something that it seems like general normally seems to get used for is lots of questions and lots of kind of the scattered answers. And it's probably hard for people to follow threads of who's answering whose question and when was a question actually answered and was it. And I didn't know if it would be helpful to just test run by adding a Discord forum channel, since that would pretty much force people to have the self-contained. I don't know what people would think about testing that out, or if people have had good experiences with that normally, what your thoughts are.
I'm gonna do a very vocal and vehement no. I feel like it's also duplicating what we're trying to do with discussions, right? So like on GitHub,
GitHub discussions,
yeah, on GitHub, I think that that's a better place to have that forum.
Good point. So we don't have it in Discord and Stack Overflow and GitHub discussions and Reddit. It's okay. We got an RSS feed pushing to that. I can also check. I don't know how responsive the team has been usually to questions and discussions, but we'll see if make sure that they're alerted.
Anyone knows?
Well, go ahead.
Anyone knows whether it's possible to have a pull request RSS feed?
Oh,
Yeah, I could set one up. I could have a feed that is like new PR opened or something like that in the feeds list. Is that something that is that kind of what you mean, Matt?
I think yes, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I know you can do that with with Slack because I currently have the extensions that I'm sort of owner of right now linked up to my Slack so I don't miss stuff.
Got it. I'll
That's a
look
good
into getting
idea.
that set up then, yeah. Would it make sense to, so it would be PRs, but what about GitHub issues? I suppose that kind of stuff gets triaged anyway normally because of how they're labeled, but
Yeah, I think that could be also useful, but without the comments, without
right.
like just the new pull request and new issues and no more noise.
Right. Okay. All right, that's all I had for what people in the extensions working group were thinking.
Cool. All right. Well,
Ooh,
we don't.
Okay,
Go ahead.
Shane isn't here, but I thought of a joke that we could tell.
I
Okay.
thought I was gonna have to do it. Go, Lisa.
Oh, if you want to do it, like some more, you could do it if you want.
No, go for it.
I was thinking because I knew Shane wouldn't be here, and I got this once from a podcast that is now long gone, but it was called like the Dinner Party Download, and they always ended or started. So they actually started the podcast with a joke. So knock knock,
Who's there?
brown chicken.
Brown chicken who?
Brown chicken, brown cow. Anyway, there you go. All right. That was just one from the Dinner Party Download way back in the day. So, all right.
All
I
right,
think
we're gonna have
that's
to
an
make
American
sure.
joke.
Yeah. Sorry.
I don't get it at all.
You don't get that one? You haven't heard like the bow chicka bow bow. Like you haven't heard that just kind of like funky, riff
Oh,
or anything like that.
But way back in the summer when I lived here.
It's all
years.
good. Yeah,
Fine.
you're right. If you have to explain a joke, it's not funny. So yeah, sorry, bad joke. Do you have a better one, Nick? You can tell a better one, right?
I'm just thinking about it. It's probably going, what?
I've got a couple of terrible ones that I can just lob over the fence and then cut out of the Zoom.
Sounds good.
Why can't a leopard hide? Because he's always spotted.
Oh, that sounds like a Laffy Taffy joke, like the kind you'd read there.
What do you
Nice.
call an illegally parked frog? Toad.
Okay, I like that one. That's a good one.
All right, I got a little bit of a chuckle. I'm done.
Nice. Very good. All right, I think you win the joke wars this time, Nick. This time. All right. Cool. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.